Welcome to the VandySports podcast on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick. This week's Vanderbilt football pregame show is brought to you by The Wash House, the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Sutherland & Belk, John Levin, his company Wobble Bond Dickinson, and Yeaman Packaging Systems. Topics on today's show are brought to you by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro. A partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee. They now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today, they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with Purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more info, visit their website at mpmci.com. Well, the number one Alabama Crimson Tide come into Nashville this Saturday, 3:15 p.m. Central Time kickoff on the SEC Network. We've got a full matchup preview coming up. We'll play some of Clark Lee's comments from Thursday, talking to the media. Also, we'll get to our three guests like we do every week. Storylines to watch with Joey Dwyer ahead of the matchup, and we'll check in with Kevin Ingram from the Vanderbilt Radio Network, their sideline reporter, and then we'll close it out with the Alabama perspective with Drew DeArmond from 97.7 ESPN down there in Huntsville, host of Talking Ball from 7 to 9 a.m. down there in Huntsville. So always good to check in with Drew to talk Alabama ahead of the matchup. This week's matchup preview as we dive into the game is brought to you by The Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at The Wash House take care of that for you. With two convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh, and clean laundry, ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. All right, let's dive into the matchup. It's number one Alabama, a 22.5-point favorite at Vanderbilt, who is 2-2, coming off their bye week, so 2 weeks to prepare for the Tide. It is, of course, at First Bank Stadium. You can watch it on the SEC Network if you're not able to be in town for the game. Tom Hart, Cole Kubelik, and Alyssa Lang on the call. So probably the best broadcast crew so far for Vanderbilt. That's what happens when you're playing the number one team in the country. It's Vanderbilt's 11th game all time against the number one team in the country. The Commodores played number one Georgia each of the last two seasons. So Clark Lee's program, no stranger to playing the number one team in the country. Those matchups haven't gone particularly well, but we'll talk about why this season could be a little bit different against the number one team in the country. It's the 86th meeting all-time between the Commodores and the Crimson Tide. Vanderbilt looking for their first win over Alabama since 1993. Last time out, Alabama won 55-3 in Tuscaloosa over the Commodores, and a discouraging piece of stat for Vanderbilt fans. In the last three meetings, Alabama has outscored Vanderbilt 148-3, and the Commodores haven't scored a touchdown against the Tide since 2007. So tough going, tough sledding so far for Vanderbilt against Alabama, at least here in the last few matchups. And again, we'll talk about why this season could be a little bit different. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Vanderbilt took number 7 Missouri to double overtime before losing 30-27 after Brock Taylor missed a potential game-tying field goal. Vandy's already played 2 overtime games this season. You saw the win over Virginia Tech to start the season, and then, of course, a couple of weeks ago at Missouri. That's the most since 1998. So, again, Vanderbilt has been in some pressure-packed situations. We'll see if that helps them this week and also down the stretch of this season. Let's take a look at the latest injury report. Vanderbilt has 3 players officially out. One of them, unfortunately, is still Zaylen Wood, the MTSU transfer who was banged up a couple of weeks ago, did not play much against Georgia State, and really hasn't played since early in that game. So they got to find a way to get Zaylen Wood back. He has an ankle injury that he's dealing with, so we'll continue to track Zaylen Wood. Of course, Mark Davis out since the beginning of the year. He'll be out for the season. Grayson Morgan is still listed as out. Clark Lee did say that he's slowly progressing, and maybe that changes here in the next couple of weeks to questionable or even probable. So we'll see if Morgan is able to progress a little bit better than he has. One player listed as questionable, edge rusher Boubacar Diakite. He has not been able to play very much this season at all. And then 4 players listed as probable. A couple of wide receivers, Loic Fungi and Joseph McVay, who caught a touchdown against Missouri. And then a couple of defensive players. Dante Carter is probable. at safety. And this is positive news. Maybe the best and most noteworthy piece of news on this injury report, Corday Sidnor is probable. So, and Luke White actually said yesterday on our Roundtable podcast that he'll likely be in there on passing downs, passing situations. So keep an eye on that with Corday Sidnor, but that is the latest injury report as of Thursday night. Speaking of Thursday, earlier today, Clark Lee was asked if there's anything different about facing a team coming off the type of win that Alabama had last week over Georgia in thrilling fashion in front of an unbelievable environment with a couple of big plays made there late by receiver Ryan Williams and then cornerback Xavier Brown picking it off and giving Alabama the victory. And despite this week being a potential letdown spot for the Tide, Clark Lee expects Kalen DeBoer's team to give the Commodores their best shot.
I just assume that they're, over it, and that would be the message I would have to our team too. You move past the emotions of a win or a loss, and you reset to the next opponent. So I can't, project anything other than we're going to get their best shot. We want to give them our best shot, and I'm excited to play at home and to have a chance to compete with them.
That's Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lee talking about the matchup with Alabama. Number one, Alabama rolling into Nashville. Well, it's going to be a beautiful Saturday if you're headed to the game. Throughout the day, you'll have some clouds in the morning. That'll give way to mainly sunny skies for the afternoon. You got a high of 87 degrees, light winds. So, again, it'll be a picture-perfect day and a little hot even. But as it gets into the night, it's supposed to get into the 60s, actually. So as that game progresses, it'll likely cool off a little bit. Clear skies with a low of 62 degrees. So sunny, hot day for most of the game, but I'm sure late, you get into the fourth quarter, it'll cool off a little bit, maybe even quarter zip weather. So should be great weather on Saturday for Vanderbilt and Alabama fans in attendance. Well, speaking of Alabama, obviously we know what happened in the offseason. Nick Saban announced his retirement, and just 2 days later, Alabama announced his successor would be Kalen DeBoer, fresh off leading Washington to a national title appearance. Saban's retirement sent shockwaves across the SEC. It's the end of a legendary run, but this roster still stocked with 5 stars and future NFL players. Kalen DeBoer's had success everywhere he's been. 67-3 record at the NAIA level, 37-9 record in Division I. He's 30-3 against power conference opponents. He's 6-0 against Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, and Dan Lanning. So he's a proven winner, and he's proven to be one of the better coaches in the country and one of the hotter coaches in the country as well. And now he's got all kinds of talent at Alabama. The Tide last season finished 12-2, lost to Michigan in the Rose Bowl. But you roll into this season, you start off with a 63-0 win over Western Kentucky at home, but then you face a South Florida team at home. Then that was a battle, really, for 3 quarters. And then, really almost 3.5 quarters where, you get into that fourth quarter and Alabama started to rally up some points, and they end up winning 42-16. And then they put up 42 points again on the road at Wisconsin in a game that was really never close. So they get a road win out of the conference. You get 3 non-conference games out of the way, and then you have 2 weeks to prepare for Georgia, and you have one of the better games of the season. I mean, game of the century type. Alabama gets up 28-7. They were up 30-7 at the half, up 28-0 there in the first half. And as I mentioned, they lead 30-7 at the half, but Georgia comes all the way back. They take the lead late, but then Jalen Milroe throws one up to Ryan Williams, and Williams does whatever he did. I still don't know how he did what he did on that catch. And then that took the lead. And then Xavier Brown, another freshman, caught the interception there. It's a ridiculous catch. So Alabama's young talent really coming through in the clutch there for the Tide as they move to 4-0 and now have to travel to Nashville for this matchup. An inside look at Alabama. Offensively, they're averaging 487 yards per game, 265 passing yards per game, and 222 rushing yards per game. So very balanced offense. And it all starts with Jalen Milroe. 964 passing yards on the season, 10 touchdowns through the air, only 1 interception. But also, you can't forget about his legs. He's rushed for 273 yards. Oh, and also 8 touchdowns. So 18 total touchdowns accounted for through 4 games, which is a ridiculous number. He's the straw that stirs the drink for Alabama. He's the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. Obviously, last week against Georgia, he accounted for 491 total yards and 4 touchdowns. Just a ridiculous performance for Jalen Milroe. Obviously, a huge challenge for this Vanderbilt defense. Bama's got a couple of really good running backs in Jam Miller, who has 273 yards and a couple of touchdowns on the season, as well as Justice Haynes, another guy to watch. At receiver, just talked about him. Ryan Williams, second in the SEC in receiving yards at 462 on the season. Excuse me, and 5 touchdowns. The kid's 17 years old. As if you didn't already know, he caught the game-winning touchdown there against Georgia. Also got a couple other threats there. Jeremy Bernard transfer from Washington, and then Kobe Prentice as well. Threats on the outside. Kendrick Law is listed as out for Alabama, so they will be down a receiver, but still a ton of talent. You flip over to the defense led by Kane Womack from South Alabama, who was the head coach down there. Not a ton of slip for that Alabama defense, led by linebacker Jahad Campbell, leads the team with 32 tackles. And then defensive end Quade Robinson is a guy to watch, leads the team with 3.5 sacks. So obviously Vanderbilt's got their work cut out for them. And Alabama is a team that anytime you face them, you're going to give it your best shot. And CJ Taylor, Vanderbilt's safety, had some really interesting comments on facing Alabama and what it means for a Vanderbilt team to go against an Alabama team. He caught up with Joey Dwyer earlier this week. Take a listen.
All right, Joey Dwyer here with CJ Taylor ahead of Vanderbilt's matchup with Alabama. CJ, tell me what you're feeling going into the weekend. What's the preparation been like?
Yeah, I mean, it's been our best week of preparation. Everybody's, here, like, everybody's going to be here, but we're here, like, in the mind, like, we're very, we're ready for this game, and, yeah, it's exciting. I think that a lot of people are going to be surprised. I know we aren't, but a lot of people are going to be surprised by the outcome of the game.
Sure. You guys have kind of carried the ship with you through the entire year. You mentioned the preseason. You want to answer questions that people had. How do you feel that's kind of infiltrated itself into your preparation throughout the year?
Yeah, I mean, our prep's always been our prep, but, when a team comes with a chip on their shoulder, they're harder to defeat. And it's not just me, it's everyone, from top down. But everyone has a chip on their shoulder, and we want to prove people wrong.
You feel like you've kind of proven some things throughout the year, and obviously people have questions for some moving positions. Where do you feel you've proven things?
I ain't proved nothing yet, but it's a long season, so every day I come in here, every day we come in here, we're looking to prove, like, answer the questions, and I think 48 hours will answer a lot, and like I said, we're very excited. I think people are forgetting to remember this is the same team that played USF a couple weeks ago, so I'm confident.
How do you feel your year has gone as a whole? Obviously, you're picking against Alcorn, but it feels like you have more to prove?
Yeah, I have a lot more to prove. Slow start for my level, but like I said, I'm excited. There's more to come. The old CJ's still there, so yeah.
How do you feel the change has gone with changing positions? Obviously, it's a different look for you.
Yeah, it's just, you have to watch a lot of films, and in my old position that I was playing, it was more like instinctual, and like if you have the instincts, you can play the position. And now it's like I have to know what they're doing before they do it, so I can make a play. So obviously I'm further away from the ball, but I like the position more than what I did. I can see everything better, so yeah.
Was part of the move going to playing like a true safety position? Was that part of kind of your pro outlook and maybe looking at that in the future?
Yeah, like whenever the season ended last year, we have our end of season meetings or whatever, and me and Coach Lee had talked about it, and like that was the first thing we talked about was we moving positions, and that was one of the reasons why I'm at Vanderbilt.
Sure. How have you kind of grown as a player throughout the years? Obviously, come in playing a different position than you're at now, and you feel like you've grown in certain aspects of your game?
Yeah, for sure. Just learning football, I've grown in that aspect, and like my body, I've grown with wisdom, I've grown with knowledge, I've grown with my physical attributes and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, I would say I've grown a lot as a football player and as a man.
Sure. Before we get you out of here, I want to talk more about Alabama. They've obviously got a bunch of guys that got some national attention this week. What's the game plan against them, or what are your emphasis points going into that game?
Yeah, I mean, not to put any dud to what they did, because obviously it was great. Like I watched it, it was good, it was interesting, and obviously it was fun to watch. But yeah, they have good players. We have good players, and yeah, I mean, Milroe's a guy. The Ryan Williams kid, he's good, and they're dangerous. But you can also know what makes yourself dangerous. So we know what makes us dangerous. We know what makes them dangerous. So what's going to come down to is limiting what they're dangerous at and emphasizing what we are good at. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a plan to stop anyone. Obviously, we're going to stop Alabama, but good players make plays, and I think we're going to make more than them.
Sure. You played against running quarterbacks before, Anthony Richardson, a bunch of other guys that don't come to mind initially, but I'm sure you think of what's the game plan against guys like that, especially Milroe, who can kind of circle the defense, as Clark said a couple days ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's playing with leverage. Obviously, like he's a good runner. I think that's when he's most dominant, is when he's running the ball. I don't think anyone really fears him when it comes to anything else, but his legs that's dominant, and like that's what I'm saying. Like, you got to know what makes you dangerous, and I'm sure he knows that. So he knows when he has the ball in his hands that he can win a game. So he's a great player, and just like Anthony Richardson, he was a fourth-round pick, or the first-round pick in the fourth, or the first pick in the fourth round. But yeah, he was dangerous with his legs too. And like my position, I wanted to move position so I could show people that I can play deep and all that. Just like him, he wants to show people he can throw the ball. So obviously he knows that running the ball makes him dangerous, but he also wants to show scouts and show people that he can throw the ball. So I'm interested in seeing that too.
Sure.
Big thanks to Joey Dwyer for his player interview there with CJ Taylor. Some big-time confidence there from CJ Taylor. So looking forward to Saturday's matchup. Again, 3:15 p.m. Central Time kickoff on the SEC Network. And speaking of Joey Dwyer, we're going to go right back to him, right back to the well with Joey Dwyer for our weekly visit with him. We're going to talk about what Vanderbilt accomplished over the bye week and what some of their to-do list included, things like cleaning up penalties, not getting behind the chains, and obviously containing Jalen Milroe and how tough that's going to be. But also, what can we learn about Vanderbilt on Saturday? Well, what more can we learn about this team? Got into all that with Joey Dwyer from right here at VandySports.com. So we're going to keep this pregame show rolling with our first interview with Mr. Joey Dwyer. Joey Dwyer, we're back. Vanderbilt and Alabama coming up this Saturday. It's been a couple weeks, Joey. Hope you had a good bye week, and we're back ready to roll with some more Vanderbilt football this weekend. Let's start with the bye week itself. Vanderbilt's got 2 weeks to prepare for an Alabama team that's now number 1 in the country, and we'll talk about Alabama a little bit later, Joey. But Clark mentioned at the Tuesday presser that penalties will be the focus. I mean, the penalties. That's all really he talked about. He talked about some other things, being sound defensively and offensively, continuing to take care of the football and things like that. But Joey, I thought a big theme was finding a way to eliminate the penalties. And, it was interesting. He talked about it. He said, the more we talk about it, the more it becomes an issue. So I don't think they're trying to harp on it too much with the guys, but to a degree you have to, Joe, because, I mean, you could say they eliminate 3-4 penalties in their losses. You could say they win those games. So penalties were the theme, Joey, and it'll be interesting to see, can they clean it up on Saturday? I don't know that if they clean it up, they'll win, right? Because you're playing number 1 team in the country. But I think if you play a clean football game with under 5-6 penalties, I mean, they've had 8-9 penalties. They're averaging almost 8 penalties a game, Joey, which is bottom of the country. So what did you gather? I thought it was interesting. That was a big focus on Tuesday for Clark.
For sure, that was a huge focus. They were penalized 8 times for 93 yards against Mizzou, and like you said, if 1 or 2 of those goes the other way, I think they have a chance to win that game, and they had a chance to win the game. So maybe that swings it. Diego Pavia talked this week about how they're close, and they all believe that they're close to kind of breaking through and winning some of the games and punching in some wins that they haven't in the past. And I think penalties are going to be a huge part of that. Offensively, I think they really harped on not getting behind the sticks, and we talked about that a ton throughout, especially the Georgia State and Mizzou weeks, that they're not a team that's built to play from 3rd and 10 or things along those lines. I think Alabama can get away with that a lot more than Vanderbilt can. Vanderbilt's going to have to put together long possessions that they're taking care of the ball and they're consistently getting ahead of the down. And they didn't necessarily do that against Mizzou, and I think they survived. I think they had, 7 or 8 3-and-outs, and Diego Pavia mentioned that as well. So that's the emphasis points offensively. They have to get in front of the sticks, and they can't go 3-and-out as often as they have, especially against Alabama. You can't keep the defense on the field as much as they kept the defense on the field against Missouri. I think ultimately those are the two things that really cost them that game. The defense obviously had its issues, but offensively, those are the things that they could have done to be better in that game. Defensively, obviously, there were a couple coverage breaks, and I think the rushing defense is going to be a big question, especially against Jalen Milroe this week. But Billy, it just boils down to the things that this program has always talked about: winning in the margins, the little things. Clark Lee harped on that all week, and it kind of reminds me of the turnover thing this offseason, to where they're trying to find a balance of, do we continue to just consistently pound this in their heads, or do we maybe kind of back off it a little bit? They consistently pounded it into their heads all offseason. And Tim Beck even talked about in the spring, are we talking about turnovers too much? It turns out they haven't been. They've only turned it over once throughout 4 games, which were pretty remarkable stat that I think has got lost in some of their losing recently. But it's just kind of been offset with penalties. It's been offset with 3 and outs. I think if they can get both going this weekend, maybe they can't win this game, but they can be a little more competitive than people think.
I'm glad you mentioned getting behind the chains. Pavia talked about that when we sat down with him on Tuesday, and he said that's the biggest thing. He quickly said that. He got a question about the issues. He said we get behind the chains too much, and so that, again, a lot of this is pointing to down the stretch of the season. When we talk about these issues, not necessarily lasering it on this Alabama game, but we will get into the path later, Joey, and I think that goes into it. The penalties, getting behind the chains against a team like Alabama. And you mentioned Jalen Milroe. I want to get to what Clark Lee talked about in his philosophy of defending Jalen Milroe here in a second. But the last 2 meetings against Alabama, Joey, as you know, have not gone well for Vanderbilt at all. They've been outscored 114-3, and they've only played Alabama 4 times since 2007. But the last time they scored a touchdown against Alabama was 2007. So, again, it's not like they were playing every year, but it's eerily similar to the Georgia thing. Haven't scored a touchdown in Georgia in 5 years, and obviously Vanderbilt finally did last year with London Humphreys, who is now a Georgia Bulldog. But, Joey, could this year be different? That's my question. And I say different in you don't lose 55-0, right? Instead, and I know this is ridiculous talking about scores. I think losing 34-14 might be better, or 21. I think keeping the game manageable, within reach, competitive, and making Alabama earn everything, right? Maybe not necessarily the scoreboard, Joey, but what we see with our own eyes should be different than the last 2 times Vanderbilt has played Alabama. And if it's not, Vanderbilt will. I think this is a good litmus test of an LSU or a Tennessee, obviously a Texas. If they come out and compete with Alabama and just fight and give it all they got, and you're in a ball game maybe in the 4th quarter, or at least 3rd quarter, I think that can say something about maybe they can do that against Texas. Maybe you see that a little bit of that against LSU, Tennessee, last game of the season. So that's how I look at it, Joey. Just eye test wise, can it be different? I think it can. Do you?
I think there's certainly a path to it being different, and I think they think that as well, and that's one of the reasons I think that. Langston Patterson talked yesterday about how they're looking at this game as a real opportunity and not just a game that they're happy to be there against Alabama. And I think that's a big differentiator between this team and past teams. They're not just happy to go and say, oh, we're playing against NFL players, this is cool. They want to go out there and compete, and I feel like that mindset, the intent of that mindset has been there, but I feel like that mindset hasn't fully been there, and we'll see if it actually is on Saturday. But they're saying the right things for now. Diego Pavia had one of the quotes of the week saying, only God knows who will win this game, even though the 24.5-point spread, I think maybe that tells you what God is thinking. But I think Diego Pavia has kind of instilled some belief in this team that maybe you haven't seen in the past. And I think maybe that carries you into competing against a team like this. Obviously, last year they had the fast start, but you just knew they weren't going to beat Georgia, and that you knew that it probably wasn't going to be super close. I think if they get to a fast start this week, there's no guarantee that it's a close game, but I think they're made up of the right things. They have a better blueprint than they've had, to where maybe it could be a little bit closer than it has been in the past. I think that's probably the path, is following that blueprint, and we'll talk about that later, what that blueprint exactly is. But it feels like there's a better level of belief, and they're in a better spot mentally heading into this matchup than they have been in the last 2. I don't think that's super hard to do, but at some point, mindset doesn't matter a whole lot against Alabama. It's how you perform on the field. And I think Alabama's got more talent, but I also think Vanderbilt has more talent than they've had in the past, to where I'm not expecting them to go in this game and lose 55-0. I'm not expecting them to win it, but I'm certainly not expecting them to get ran off the field in an embarrassing way. I'm expecting Alabama fans after this game to look at Vanderbilt and say, well, that's a team that competed and maybe is heading in the right direction. I think that would be, in Clark Lee's mind, a negative outcome, but I think overall a positive outcome for this weekend. Vanderbilt going in there and showing that they've taken steps forward as a program and showing that to a bigger audience.
Yeah, I remember talking about that walking out of the Georgia game last year, Joey, because especially last year, you had to muddle our way through the fans, to get down to the field level and into the post-game presser. But that's what Georgia fans were talking about. I mean, they respected what Vanderbilt gave them. They respected the effort. And I think that should be a similar conversation after this one amongst the Alabama fans. Like you said, there's going to be a lot of them in the stadium, of course. But to beat Alabama or to even compete with Alabama for Vanderbilt, Jalen Milroe is the focus. I mean, what he did Saturday night against Georgia, Joe, he accounted for almost 500 yards total, 4 touchdowns. I mean, this is a special talent. And I thought it was interesting, Clark Lee, when he was asked about him, obviously he was asked about Milroe and Ryan Williams a lot, but getting into the defensive mind of Coach Lee was interesting. He said, you can't always have an extra guy for the quarterback, and that extra guy is a spy, Joey. So a lot of people say, well, every play you got to have a spy on Milroe. Well, that's not always the safest play. He said you have to minimize his run lanes. You have to close the middle. He can hurt you evading the pass rush as well. So if you have a spy, that more times than not, that spy is going to get beat by a guy like Jalen Milroe. I mean, he did that against Georgia. And I thought it was interesting how Clark got into this. And then I asked him, when a quarterback is more of a threat in the running game than the running back, what does that change your approach? And he ended up joking. He said, well, the running backs are pretty good too. But he said you can't design your total package about taking the ball out of his hands, because he's so dangerous in escaping and throwing the ball too, Joey. So I don't know how you defend Jalen Milroe. I thought Clark did a really good job. And if you missed it, go to our YouTube channel. And I think it's towards the beginning and then towards the end when we asked him about Jalen Milroe. But either way, Joey, it's going to be hard. But I think what's interesting is you can plan. You can plan to keep him in the pocket. You can plan to have a spy on him. All of that goes away in an instant because he's a freak athlete.
Yeah, you're right, Billy. He's a special talent. And I don't know that in my time on the beat I've seen a quarterback at that level like I'm going to see on Saturday. The one play stands out to me about Jalen Milroe against Georgia. I think they had a spy on him and just gets out of the pocket. There's like 3 guys waiting for him at the first down marker, and he just kind of swerves to the right of all of them and turns it upfield and runs for 30, 40 yards. I mean, that's what he can do to you, and that's what he can do against Georgia. Imagine what he can do. Vanderbilt's not sharp. I think they're going to have to be really sharp in terms of slowing him down in the run game. Clark Lee mentioned a lot, though. He's going to get his. I think Vanderbilt's going to have to live with that, and I don't know what the path is necessarily on defense. I think trying to make them play with their left hand is almost a fool's errand because they're so good in every area. You just kind of got to minimize your own mistakes and make them earn it the long, hard way, as Clark Lee has often said. But Jalen Milroe, I think, is a guy who you can do a ton for, but it's like, what is the Muhammad Ali quote? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. I think that's kind of the sentiment I have with Jalen Milroe and Vanderbilt. He is a special talent. It's similar to Ryan Williams. You can do all you can in the week, and you can have a plan. And then once Ryan Williams goes and bobbles the ball and makes a one-handed catch and makes a guy miss, there's nothing you can do about it, and your plan falls short. That's kind of what this Alabama offense does to me. And I think Vanderbilt's just got to control what it can control. It's got to be sharp tackling. It's got to stay in its gaps, things along those lines. And maybe it can make Alabama earn it. Even if you make it earn it, though, it may still go for 30-plus points.
Right. And the funniest line of the week, I think, when he was asked about Ryan Williams, actually, he said it reminded him of some of the moves he made in the flat when he played at fullback at Vanderbilt. So obviously Clark
moves as well. That's exactly what I was thinking last Saturday, Billy.
Clark, he had some jokes on Tuesday, but Joey, let's get into the Vanderbilt side of this. What can we learn about this team on Saturday? I know we hinted at it a little bit. I think we can learn, has the talent gap shifted, right? Or how much has it shifted? Other than that, I'm not sure. I think we know that this team is going to fight. We know that this team's going to be prepared. But can we learn that this team has learned from 2 weeks of the bye week, and can they play cleaner football? So I think the talent gap, Joey, will be interesting to watch. We'll learn about that. But also, if this team hasn't cleaned up the penalties, that's not a good sign either.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. You're looking at a game against Missouri, and you probably expect them to play a little bit of a cleaner game. Alabama's just an overwhelming team to play against. And can you do the little things well and maintain your focus against big bad Alabama, who just can completely dominate you on the line of scrimmage on every given play? I don't think Vanderbilt's seen offensive linemen like Hayden Proctor yet. I don't think they've seen receivers like Ryan Williams yet. Maybe Luther Burden would be the one there. I think he has a case for one of the best players in the country. But I just look at it and say, are you overwhelmed against a team like that? Or do you stick to what your coaching staff has told you all year? And can you do the little things well to allow you to stay in that game? Does the Vanderbilt defense have busts in coverage? Are there a ton of broken tackles on Saturday? Those are the things I kind of look at. And I just look at it and say, what is your competitive spirit like? They're obviously going to be ready to go. But what happens when Alabama strings off 2 touchdowns in a row? Does Vanderbilt respond with their own? Or are they getting completely ran off the field? That's my thing. I think if they win this game, you learn that Clark Lee is going to have a job for a long time at Vanderbilt, and that Diego
Build the statue.
And Diego Pavia is never buying himself another meal in Nashville. But that's not necessarily what I'm expecting. I'm more so looking at what is this team made of, and are they overwhelmed by a team as talented as this? It's the number 1 team in the country for a reason. It's a tall task for them. It's a challenge, but are they willing to embrace that challenge like they said they've been embracing it throughout the week?
Last thing here, Joey, the path for Vanderbilt to compete in this game on Saturday, I think is different than the last 2 meetings. The last 2 meetings against Alabama, you gotta make Alabama play their worst game, and you got to play the game of your life, and maybe you got a shot. This year for Vanderbilt, I think, Joey, again, they play clean football, but staying ahead of the chains and moving the chain. I mean, when you have the ball on offense, Clark said earlier in Commodore Hour this week, we want under 10 possessions. It's probably not going to happen. I mean, it could, but probably not. But that's the path. If Vanderbilt has under 10 possessions, that means they're getting first downs. They're likely, maybe they're not scoring touchdowns, but they're kicking field goals. They're putting points on the board. And defensively, maybe you give up some yards, but you sort of bend but don't break. So, again, there is a path. There's a more visible path than there's been in the past, Joey, but it's still very tough. I mean, the margin for error is obviously very small. But what say you on the path for Vanderbilt, and what are I know you looked at what are you going to learn there? You're looking at missed tackles, things like that. But what is the path in your mind for Vanderbilt on Saturday to compete and make this a second half football game that Alabama has to go out there and earn?
I think we've talked a lot about little things like penalties, getting ahead of the chains. Things along those lines are going to determine how competitive they are in this game. I think it's a great point bringing up what Clark said on Commodore Hour. The path to them competing with any team like this is kind of playing like the old VCU style basketball game where the score is
Service Academy.
Yeah, the score is 55-53 in a basketball game, not a football game.
Right.
And you're full court pressing the whole game. You're making the other team have 20 turnovers, and that's how you stay in the game. You limit the possessions. You kind of throw off their rhythm. Don't let them get in a run. That's kind of what it reminds me of in a football sense here, like the service academies, like you said. Vanderbilt is going to throw a different look at Alabama, and it's got to make sure that Alabama doesn't continually have opportunities to go out and embarrass them, right? They've got to make this game kind of a muck fest, for lack of a better term. And I think that's the path here. You've got to control the ball offensively, but you've got to put together long drives that result in touchdowns, not field goals, if you want to stay in this game. And you've got to take the ball out of Alabama's best players' hands, and they're going to put the ball in their best players' hands if they get the ball. You got to get your defense off the field quickly and keep your offense on the field for a long time. That's a lot easier said than done. So I think one 3-and-out makes it a 13-possession game instead of a 10-possession game, and that's where the concern lies with that number, obviously. But I think Vanderbilt does have a path to making this game competitive. It's a lot easier said than done, but I think they have a path in some senses to be able to do it.
Well, we'll see. Saturday, 3:15 kickoff in Nashville, Vanderbilt and Alabama. You can watch it on the SEC Network. Joey and I will be there. We'll have last-minute thoughts. We'll have rapid reaction. We'll have report cards and everything ready to roll. So stay tuned with our coverage. And Joey's headed out to talk to Clark and special guest coming up here on the pregame show. So stay tuned for that. But Joey, thanks again. I'll see you Saturday.
See you Saturday, Billy.
Before we keep this pregame show rolling, in our next interview with Kevin Ingram, Vanderbilt Radio Network sideline reporter, got to get to a few sponsors. Our guest line is presented by John Levin, good friend of the show. Wobble Bond Dickinson, his company. They thank the student athletes at Vanderbilt University for their dedication, effort, and hard work. Our guest line is also presented by Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. And Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm, sponsors the chat room and today's mailbag, even though we don't have a mailbag. But if you or a loved one has been hurt or in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200 to see what your rights are and if they can help. And now on to our interview with Kevin Ingram. Rolling along with our pregame show, it's now time for Vanderbilt sideline reporter Kevin Ingram on the Vanderbilt Radio Network. You can hear him alongside Andrew Allegretta and Norman Jordan there on 102.5 The Game on game days. They'll have the call on Saturday for Vanderbilt and Alabama. Kevin, how you doing? Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Billy. Always fun. I appreciate you asking.
Let's go back to Missouri a couple of weeks ago. I love getting your perspective from the sidelines, and that was probably a fun game to be on the sideline for. Obviously, tough result for Vanderbilt, but I'm interested, after the way Vanderbilt headed into the halftime locker room, you felt the confidence there, and then second half, Missouri misses some field goals, and obviously Vanderbilt had a couple of misses of their own. But what did you gather, just with the momentum swings of that game? And obviously it was brutal that Vanderbilt wasn't able to pull it out. But I mean, for them to be right there, Kevin, and for you to be right there, right around the team and there in Columbia, what did you gather from that a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, Billy, it was, in the end, it was a really tough loss. The week before at Georgia State, it felt like mistakes and things, and the game really got away. The game at Missouri, to me, had a little bit different feel. And again, there were some penalties and mistakes and those things, but I thought Vanderbilt really battled and played well in that game against Missouri and had an opportunity. You have the lead in overtime and you get some stops and you get out of there with a first SEC win. But of course, Missouri, they do what they do. It was Brady Cook to Luther Burden, and all of a sudden the game's back tied again. You're going to a second overtime. But I think for Vanderbilt, they did take away maybe a little bit of validation and some confidence from that game, in that they know that they can go on the road and play a top 10 team and play really well and have an opportunity to win. So I think that was probably the biggest takeaway. But it was a tough scene when the game was over with. And I talked to Diego Pavia for our post-game show, and you could see the emotion kind of pouring out of him a little bit. Just after just seeing the way it ended, and he actually had a couple of his offensive linemen with him just for some support as we did our post-game interview. But I felt like that one meant a lot to the team, and I mean, they all mean a lot to the team, but it felt like it was just a tough one to take when you're so close to having that breakthrough SEC road win here early in the season. But I do think the team can take away some confidence as they went into the open date and now return for a tough 6-game stretch over the next 6 weeks, starting with Alabama this Saturday at home.
Yeah, you mentioned the bye week there, and talking to Clark earlier this week, he mentioned the penalties. Obviously Vanderbilt is averaging almost 8 penalties per game, which I think is 108th in the country. And I mentioned this to Joey Dwyer earlier, Kev, that Vanderbilt cleans up a few of those penalties and a couple of those losses. Maybe you're looking at a different result because you look at a lot of those and they can be in really huge spots. Especially going back to that Georgia State game. Is the penalties for you, Kevin, the biggest thing that you think this team can still clean up? And if they do, that could make a big impact in some of these games down the stretch here.
Yeah, it really could, Billy. I think that's a great point. 8 penalties for 93 yards in the game at Missouri. I mean, you you commit that many, and you're going to have a hard time winning, especially against good teams. I think some of them you just look at and say, okay, special teams and just things that you don't. It's not like they're marginal plays. Like sometimes you get a late hit on a quarterback, and you kind of look at it and go, well, that one could go either way. But some of the penalties are just ones that you can definitely clean up and eliminate. And it's funny, that really hasn't been that big of a problem for this team over the last few years. It's been something where this program's played pretty clean football, and penalties haven't really hurt as much as it feels like they have so far this season. I know that's been a big source of frustration for Clark Lee, and that's something that was certainly addressed, I think, during the off week, where they had a chance to get in a little extra practice work and work on some of those things and talk about those things, and have some talking points and coaching points that these guys can remember when they're on the field to try to prevent some of the flags and keep from giving up that yardage that could be so crucial, and especially around special teams, kickoffs and punts and those things.
Well, I know you got to see Alabama, Georgia on Saturday, and that was just a thriller. Probably the best game we'll see all season, if not one of the best. And now Vanderbilt has to play Alabama, the number 1 ranked team in the country. For Alabama, Kevin, it's interesting looking at this game from their perspective. You come off a huge emotional win over Georgia, and now you have to go into Nashville, play a Vanderbilt team with 2 weeks to prepare for you. And Jerry Kill in this offense, and Tim Beck, Pavia, and these guys with a couple of weeks to prepare for an opponent. Not sure that's so fun for a defense to have to prepare for. So where do you see the opportunities for Vanderbilt, maybe specifically offensively, to potentially have some success on Saturday?
Yeah, Billy, I think the biggest thing for Vanderbilt is keep the offense on the field. Clark Lee talked about it when we did our show Monday. They want to, the goal is to at least get a couple first downs and keep the offense moving, not go 3 and out. And then Alabama's offense is right back on the field with Jalen Milroe ready to stack up some more points. They've averaged 47 per game. You're not going to outscore Alabama unless you're somebody, that can really have a high-powered offense and put a lot of points on the board. Not that Vanderbilt's offense can't. We've seen that they're certainly capable, but you don't want to get into that kind of game with Alabama. I think if you're Vanderbilt, you want to try to keep the score a little bit lower. You want to keep your offense on the field. You want to grind the clock. Things that Vanderbilt did well in their wins, especially all the way back to the start of the season against Virginia Tech. Got off to a good start there, played from ahead. Really the same thing in Missouri. Vanderbilt got off to a good start in that game, the long touchdown, and it was either tied or the Commodores were ahead pretty much all the first half and into the second half. So that's the way you want to try to play this game if you can. Try to keep those guys in check. The best way to keep Alabama's offense in check is, it's a joke or a cliche, but to keep them on the sideline. I think maybe Georgia showed you some things that you can possibly capitalize on if you're an opposing offense. They had Alabama's defense definitely on their heels in that second half. There's no doubt. I mean, it was 2 completely different games. I always say football games are like 4 games in one when you look over the course of 4 quarters. And that game was definitely a couple different games. The way Alabama came out and just blew their doors off in the first half, that Georgia made the great comeback and took the lead. So maybe there are some things you can take away from what Georgia did against Alabama's defense, but they still have some familiar names, including Malachi Moore. He's been around there a long time. Jahad Campbell, Deontay Lawson. I mean, those guys are really good players. So they have plenty of good parts on their defense. The points that gave up against Georgia were a season high, but the rest of the time they've done a great job. So yeah, it's a big challenge, but I think Diego Pavia, and listening to some of his comments this week, and just feel like how confident he is, I think he's really looking forward to the challenge. Like I think this is, for a guy who's not played in the Southeastern Conference but one game, and of course this will be game 5 of the season, he definitely has the confidence of a veteran and a guy who just relishes these spots rather than maybe being afraid of the moment or whatever you might say about it.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you about that, Kevin, because got a chance to talk to him on Tuesday, and he's just confident, and obviously he's an older guy, played a lot of football, but you feel like he's breathed some of that into this team, whether it's through Coach Clark Lee, but obviously having Jerry Kill and Tim Beck in there with him and with that offense has helped a lot as well. But the last couple matchups, Kevin, Vanderbilt's been outscored 114-3. Obviously they haven't gone their way, but listening to Pavia and some other guys on this team, especially Langston Patterson, you feel like this could be a little bit different. I think you saw a little bit of a taste of in the Georgia game last year. Obviously Vanderbilt was competitive for a good bit of that game. Think we could maybe see some of that on Saturday, and just a different looking Vanderbilt team in a more competitive group.
Yeah, for sure. I think this Vanderbilt team is much improved from last year. You can say the record is what it is, and that's very true. But I think this team definitely is better and more competitive. Going back to that game against Georgia last year, I thought it was maybe the best game Vanderbilt played the whole season. Everybody's expecting Georgia to come in here and beat them up, and Vanderbilt really played well and hung in there against what was then the number one team in the country with the Bulldogs. I think you look at it that way when you go into this game. If you're Vanderbilt, you approach every game like you're going to go in and win. You put in the game plan and you try to figure out how to get the job done. It's a big challenge. There's no question facing this Alabama team. And you look at it, and Alabama's had the upper hand for years in this matchup when they've played, and they haven't played tons of time in the last 20 or 30 years with them being in opposite divisions. You just kind of play when the rotation comes back around. It's different now with the divisions gone. But to me, like, those games don't really have any bearing on this game. Even the game a couple years ago when Vanderbilt played down at Alabama, the teams are pretty different. Most of the personnel is different. Coach is different for Alabama.
Yeah.
But as I joke, new coach, same great program for the Crimson Tide, as we saw with Kalen DeBoer getting what really was the first big win of his tenure at Alabama. I thought it's interesting, too, to hear Coach Lee talk about how he and Coach DeBoer go back a few years to when they were both in the state of South Dakota. And he said he had a lot of respect for him and just the way he goes about and does his business. But, yeah, it's a big challenge, but I think this team's looking forward to it on Saturday.
Well, looking forward to it, Kevin. Obviously, you'll be on the call there with Andrew and Norm. It's going to be mid-80s, so I'm sure you're ready for this to cool off a little bit, to get that quarter zip weather down there on the sideline.
Yeah, I don't really mind it. The thing I don't like is rain, and sometimes it feels like it rains every single week. The game against Alcorn State was the nicest weather I think you could ever dial
that
up
was
for a
perfect.
football game.
Yeah.
It was perfect out there, and it's going to be warm on Saturday, but I can deal with 86 and sunshine a whole lot better than I can deal with anything in rain or cold.
55 and rain.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. So yeah, I'll take 86 and sunny every week if that's what it takes.
Looking forward to it, Kevin. Have a good weekend, and obviously we'll be listening on the call on Saturday.
All right, sounds good, Billy. Appreciate the time.
To wrap up this week's pregame show, we're talking Alabama with Drew DeArmond, the host of Talkin' Ball on 97.7 ESPN down there in Huntsville, very close with that Alabama program. Drew, thanks for taking the time with me. I got to start with the Georgia game on Saturday. I mean, that's what everybody was watching. I was watching it. I couldn't believe it. I mean, for Georgia to come all the way back, take the lead, Alabama to show off their talent with Ryan Williams' catch and then Zabian Brown's interception. Have you ever seen an Alabama-Georgia game quite like that one?
It's funny. All those games since 2017 have meant so much, and really the only one that I've covered that didn't go down to the fourth quarter, where down to the last half of the fourth quarter at least, or even the last 2 minutes of the game, was 2021 in Atlanta. And ironically, Alabama was an underdog in that game and fell behind 10-0 before they exploded offensively and then won the game 41-24. But this was a little bit of an unusual game. I mean, I'd predicted all week that it would go down to the final 2 minutes, but I thought it would be close throughout. Alabama's start stunned me a little bit. I knew Georgia had not played an offense, in my opinion, like Alabama's, because Clemson, I don't think has that explosive capability. But Alabama was as efficient as I've seen it. I'll tell you what, Billy, it reminded me of a couple of Alabama-Georgia games combined. It reminded me of the blackout in 2008, Nick Saban's second year in Tuscaloosa, and his first win against Georgia. Alabama was, I believe, a slight underdog, and they led 31-0 at half, and then eased away and won 47-30, even though Georgia made a little bit of a run in the second half under Mark Richt. And then it also reminded me of last year's game where Alabama dominated the first half, built a lead, Georgia adjusted, made a run, and then Alabama was able to control the ball in the fourth quarter, score a touchdown. They gave up one to Georgia, but basically they put the game away and were able to run the clock out. This time, it was an unbelievable turn of events. I mean, Alabama led 28-0, 30-7 at halftime, but Georgia went on what amounted to about a 34-5 run. And then when they took that lead with 2:31 to go with Dylan Bell, in my opinion, the new Hines Ward, making that big play for the Dogs, I didn't know how Alabama would respond because, they had some adversity against South Florida, but they never trailed. And you just really didn't know. This was kind of one of those gut check moments. And the improvement of Jalen Milroe in the last year plus has just been astonishing, especially if you saw him like I did when he was a true freshman redshirting and how raw he was. It's amazing, the progress he's made, especially under this new staff that seems to have connected with him really well. And you saw the throw he made, one-play drive to Ryan Williams, who's such a special talent, who you guys will get a chance to see up close in Nashville on Saturday. And Ryan made an unbelievable catch and run, and they got the lead back. Now, I don't think enough people are making, a point of Alabama hitting the 2-point conversion, which I think was very important because Georgia could have scored a touchdown and won the game. But Alabama struggled a little bit in the second half defensively. They couldn't get off the field on fourth down. Carson Beck got into a rhythm, but when it mattered, Xavier Brown kind of got picked on. He was targeted 10 times. They completed 5. But all that matters is he was up to the task, when they got inside the 20, made the interception, and Alabama, you could say, escaped. But I just think, in my opinion, it's 2 of the top 5 teams in the country, and it was another classic game in the rivalry. And now Alabama, this is the next checklist for Kalen DeBoer, handling success in a game like that and being able to refocus and play against Clark Lee's, much improved Vanderbilt team that really I thought should have knocked off an unbeaten Missouri a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, let's get more into Jalen Milroe, and I'm glad you mentioned that because his improvement has been very clear. I mean, last year, not saying the kid was bad, he led him to the Rose Bowl against Michigan, but just looked different, looked more comfortable, especially against Georgia last week, accounted for almost 500 yards, 4 touchdowns. How has Kalen DeBoer been able to unlock another level of performance for him? Because like you said earlier, he looks totally different, and man, he looks like the Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, it's hard to argue that right now.
Well, I think what has happened with him is Kalen is one of these rare head coaches, like Steve Sarkisian, there's a couple others in college football. I don't necessarily think it's Lane Kiffin, but I would say Sark does a great job with it. And I think there's a Jeff Tedford, even though it was ironically, he and Kalen worked together. There are very few quarterback whisperers that I think truly develop the position in college football. And I think Kalen DeBoer and Sark are probably the 2 most prominent right now. Jeff Tedford has retired, but they do a great job of developing quarterbacks, not just play calling and building an offense, but they know how to connect with the QB, know how to get them better fundamentally, get them to play with a lot of confidence. And I think that's what Nick Sheridan and Kalen DeBoer have done, especially Coach DeBoer. I think he, if you watch his interaction, he's always talking to Milroe. And I think, I was told by a guy that I trust implicitly in the media that's very close to the Manning family that I would be very surprised when I saw, Jalen Milroe in this redshirt junior season. The NFL people that saw him this summer at the Manning Passing Academy were astonished at how well he had he was playing and performing, and we're just really pleasantly surprised at how much he had improved fundamentally and mechanically. And he just looks so much more comfortable in his own skin. And I'll be honest with you, Billy, when he got to Alabama, he was very, very raw out of Katy, Texas, and Tompkins High School. They ran a very simplistic offense. And the other thing is he's always thought of himself as a pocket quarterback. He wanted to prove that he was Tom Brady, that he could sit back there and, pick defenses apart. And you saw how many sacks he took a year ago. I think Alabama gave up the most sacks in college football, maybe like 49. Mm-hmm. Well, 3/4 of those were Milroe's fault because he held on to the ball way too long. That offensive line wasn't great, but it was better than people were giving it credit for because he had to understand and learn how to play the quarterback position. And I think he's been working hard with Coach Sheridan and Coach DeBoer, and I think he's worked on his pocket presence, but he's also become more of a willing runner. This was a bone of contention with him last year. He really didn't start becoming a willing runner until the second half of last season. This year, what I like about Coach DeBoer and the design of the offense, last year a lot of it was improvisational. This year, it's student body right, student body left. Like, you're carrying the football. You're going to be one of our top 3 ball carriers. You have to get comfortable with that. And then, he also did some improvisational stuff against Georgia. Made some plays that are just God-given where you make a guy miss and take off. And they've told him to do that some. If you don't find your opening read, we're very comfortable and we want you to run. And so they've kind of emphasized that, I think. And he's also become much more proficient at zone read. He's not perfect. Now, he made a big-time zone read for a 36-yard touchdown or so on 4th down against Georgia. He looks much more comfortable doing that than a year ago. But again, I think it's experience. And I think he and his family made a conscious decision because, as you know, Billy, in this era, you can go in the portal anytime, during your career, and especially when a coaching change is made. But I think they saw what he did with Michael Penix, both at Indiana as an offensive coordinator and then as a head coach, and making him a top 10 pick. And right now, Jalen Milroe, you just mentioned it yourself, at the top of the Heisman race, and his NFL stock is starting to skyrocket as well. So I just think that Kalen DeBoer right now and Steve Sarkisian are probably the 2 best quarterback whisperers in the game, and they're both in the SEC. And as you've seen with Quinn Ewers since he got from Ohio State, and then the early, impressions of Arch Manning, and you remember what Sark did at USC, and then even at Alabama with Mac Jones and all those guys, and of course Tua Tagovailoa. He just does a great job with the position. But I'll just tell you this too, and a lot of people don't remember, but guess when Bryce Young was recruited to Alabama, Steve Sarkisian flipped him from USC, and then it was very hard to find a quarterback to come in the year after Bryce because you couldn't find a guy who wanted to develop and sit. Well, guess who found Jalen Milroe and flipped him from Texas? That was Sark. So Sark is just really good at developing quarterbacks and seeing those tools that he thinks can be effective. And Jalen Milroe has all the athletic gifts that you would need at the position. He's 6'2". He's 235 pounds. And I'm telling you, he runs under a 4.4. He's one of the top 3 fastest guys on Alabama's team. But what he needed to develop from the neck up, which is what he started to do this year under Kalen DeBoer. And I still think he's just scratching the surface of his potential. And if he continues to get better and can stay healthy this year for the Alabama Crimson Tide, then they can make another run at a national championship.
Doesn't hurt to have Ryan Williams out there to throw. To throw to either. That kid is really special. Looking forward to definitely seeing him in person. But Drew, rat traps obviously were found at the Alabama facility earlier this week, and you're coming off an emotional win over a top 5 team, not just any top 5 team. That's a Georgia team that, everybody gets up for that game, whether you're Alabama or Georgia. Now you got to travel to Nashville. Under 30,000 fans will be there. It'll be mostly Alabama, as we know, but, maybe obviously a sleepier environment. It won't be anywhere close to the environment you just played in at your home stadium. And this is the first road SEC game, even though it'll feel like a home game. Do you see any sleepwalk potential from Alabama, or do you think Kalen DeBoer is well equipped with this team and will have them ready to go?
Well, I mean, there's certainly always, potential to be flat. But, if Alabama can execute offensively and not turn it over and be there and be sharp enough mentally to not commit, mental mistakes as far as penalties having to do with, illegal formations, false starts, things where, those are mental errors. Now, because, holding is subjective. Pass interference is subjective. That's effort stuff. But if you're committing, delay games, or if you're, illegal formations, lining up wrong, jumping off sides, false starts, things of that nature, procedure-wise, then definitely you can get yourself behind the chains and get in trouble. And look, Alabama's only got to watch that Missouri film. And Missouri, I don't really know if they're a top 10 team, but they've been ranked in that vicinity all year, and they're undefeated. You've got to give Vandy a lot of credit for playing them the way they did. And again, I know though, I'm sure Alabama's coaching staff has hammered it home, but Diego Pavia has already been a giant killer. He's already gone to Auburn and won when he was at New Mexico State. And while this coaching staff, of course, wasn't there, the Alabama Crimson Tide fan base is very familiar with offensive coordinator, and really, I guess Tim Beck's the offensive coordinator. I guess I should say assistant head coach of offense. Jerry Kill. Jerry Kill beat Alabama in Mike Schuler's first year with Northern Illinois, and Michael the Burner Turner. I certainly watched it on pay-per-view. I'll never get that money back. But Jerry Kill did a great job of beating the Tide that day, and he's been a kind of a giant killer his whole career. And so I think, and if you watch the press conference on Monday with Nick Sheridan, they have great respect for Clark Lee's defensive acumen because, of course, he was with Brian Kelly at Notre Dame when they had some really good teams. And this Vanderbilt defense has been opportunistic so far. So you've got to take care of the ball first and foremost. You've got to be physical, and they've got to run the football and continue to help Jalen Milroe out that way, because I still believe this. I still believe the running game is the most central and important thing with this offense. It takes pressure off of Jalen Milroe. Last week, they had a very balanced offense, even though they did come out throwing in the short and intermediate game. I think they put a lot of that on film for Vanderbilt to have to see, and I thought that was one of the big keys that we hadn't really seen that. A lot of people have been talking about boom or bust with Milroe. If he can't go deep, can he move the football? But he was very efficient. He hit the short and intermediate throws. The biggest thing for Alabama, though, they've just got to keep the penalties down. They had 10 more last week. They've got to win the plus-minus, which they did handily 4-1 against Georgia. They've got to force Vandy into some mistakes. And then I think they've got to run the football and be physical, because I think that's the key. I think the strength of this offense is they've got the starting five decided now on the offensive line now that Caden Proctor's healthy, or as healthy as he's going to be. And then Elijah Pritchett at right tackle. And we didn't see as much out of them, especially in the second half. But Milroe, as you know, had 100-plus yards rushing. But they need to have Jam Miller and Justice Haynes get it going, because you mentioned Ryan Williams. By the end of the Georgia game, he was being bracketed with two guys. I wouldn't be surprised if Vanderbilt does the same thing. And they'll do some things schematically to get him the ball. But if you're running the football effectively, Billy, then you know the passing game is going to be there. Eventually, you're going to have opportunities. And Alabama's got some other guys too. C.J. Dupree had a nice game at tight end. We know that I know Kobe Prentice can make plays. Jeremy Bernard has certainly been a quality transfer addition from Washington and Michigan State. And think about it. Think about this, how college football has changed. 3 years ago, Peyton Thorne and Jeremy Bernard were teammates. And they were, because Bernard spent his freshman year at Michigan State.
Wow.
So it's become so transient. But Alabama has a lot of weapons, even if they throw special attention out to Ryan Williams. I think they've got enough weapons to give Vanderbilt a lot of trouble. But then, you also – Alabama defensively has got to contain Pavia, because he is their leading passer, their leading rusher. He's the heart of the offense. And he's still going to make some plays, but they have to, contain him and control him. Alabama has done a great job in the first 4 games on third down, but they had a ton of trouble on fourth down this past Saturday against Georgia. So, and I'll just say this, I would imagine Clark Lee and Jerry Kill and his coaching staff are going to come in with nothing to lose. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're in a little bit of a 4-down mentality. So Alabama has got to get off the field and, when possible, force Vanderbilt into some mistakes, because, again, I would imagine Coach Kill will want to shorten the game. They're going to want to run it themselves. Alabama has been a little susceptible to the run, even though I thought they did a better job against the Bulldogs. But, again, they've got to make Vanderbilt one-dimensional, and then they've got to dominate in the trenches if they want to get a comfortable win in Nashville.
That's Drew DeArmond. You can find him down there in Huntsville, 97.7 ESPN, 7 to 9 a.m. They're talking ball. Does a great job. Drew, thanks for taking the time. Enjoy your trip up to Nashville, and maybe we'll get to see each other.
Yeah, Billy, I hope to see you guys up in the press box. I mean, looking forward to – Chris Lee's a great friend of mine. We had him on Talking Ball earlier this week and talking some Vanderbilt. And I think it's been a pretty remarkable turnaround for Coach Lee with all the talent that he lost, but he made a wise decision and I think in taking his program in this direction. And certainly they'll have to replace Diego, but they have some nice pieces. And this is a dangerous game for Alabama, certainly a big spread. I've got Alabama covering 42-17, but I still think it could be a game into the second half. And certainly Alabama has to avoid complacency, because they've got South Carolina at home next week, And then we all know what's looming, and that's another Super Bowl with Tennessee if both of them take care of business.
Man, it's fun. It's fun for Vanderbilt people to look ahead and with a little bit of hope, because the last couple of years, Alabama's outscored Vanderbilt 114-3. And even from the Alabama perspective, last year Vanderbilt hosted Georgia. It was competitive for a decent bit of that game. And I think from the Alabama perspective, hey, it's kind of nice we'll get to play a more respectable Vanderbilt team. So obviously there'll be a lot of crimson and white in Nashville. It'll be fun to see what happens. 3:15 on Saturday. Drew, thanks again, my friend.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
And that wraps it up. Big thanks to Drew DeArmond from down there in Huntsville, Alabama. Great preview and an inside look at the Alabama Crimson Tide in year one under Kalen DeBoer and what we can expect from Saturday's matchup between the Commodores and the Crimson Tide at First Bank Stadium. Big thanks to Joey Dwyer and Kevin Ingram as well for joining us and all their hard work in putting together this pregame show. This podcast has always been free, and we plan for it to stay like that. Here's how you can help keep it that way. Give the podcast a review and a 5-star rating. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to VandySports.com yet, please do. It's $99 a year, $9.99 a month, and helps us tremendously. Also, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel. That's free. All kinds of good content, press conferences, last-minute thoughts, rapid reactions, podcast every week, every other day. So go subscribe to our YouTube channel. Oh, and go ahead and like this video as well. Leave a comment if you'd like to as well. And then finally, if you're interested in sponsoring this show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. We'd love to have you a part of our team. Again, that's chrislee70@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy Sports Podcast.